We are in Canto 3, Book 1. We did one line in our last class. A world's desire compelled her mortal birth. Of course, we won't repeat that long discussion we had. But one thing that we need to recollect is that now Ashwapati has reached a universal consciousness where he becomes a representative of mankind's aspiration. That's why this word, world's desire, is actually his own aspiration. So it is as if he is taking within himself the entire aspiration of mankind and moving forward to present that aspiration to the Divine Mother. Now, after this first line, we have a very beautiful, brilliant description of who Ashwapati is. You see, of course, there is a kind of a flashback, as we understood last time, that this canto is majorly describing the individual Ashwapati, his soul's release. But the first page or page and a half describes more that personality of Ashwapati who is the representative of mankind. So what we are going to get here is not the personality of the king as such, but as he puts it here, the king of yoga. And look at these marvelous descriptions. One in the front of the immemorial quest, protagonist of the mysterious play, in which the unknown pursues himself through forms and limits his eternity by the hours, and the blind void struggles to live and see, a thinker and toiler in the ideal's air, brought down to earth's dumb need her radiant power. His was a spirit that stooped from larger spheres into our province of ephemeral sight, a colonist from immortality. Well, it is every word here or every line that we read here is so very dense, because here you must imagine he is etching the characteristic or the personality of Ashwapati. And if we see it closely, I for one see Sri Aurobindo doing a self-portrait. So in that manner, every line that he is drawing has to be precise and clear. So you see, one in the front of the immemorial quest. Well, what does it mean in the front of the immemorial quest? Well, at the front of, we know that he is the leader, the representative. But then, this immemorial quest, those of you who remembered the Life Divine, the very opening paragraph of the first chapter, Human Aspiration, will remember the immemorial quest of man for freedom, light, Godhead and immortality, or to put it in the right order maybe, Godhead, light, freedom and immortality. So what's important here is that he, Ashwapati, has been in the front of this immemorial quest of mankind for freedom, for light, for Godhead, for immortality. That means through this whole entire gamut of human evolution, Ashwapati has been the leader. Well, you may perhaps ask yourself, saying, how could Ashwapati be a leader of all these movements of mankind, or of all this aspiration, or the human aspiration? But someone had asked Sri Aurobindo what he was doing in his previous births. And this was his reply, that he was helping humanity in its evolution. These are not the precise words. But you see the exact reference to this, that in every form, maybe he was Augustus Caesar, or he was somebody else, or he was Leonardo da Vinci, he was many other figures. But if you see all his names, they were all this Leonardo or Julius or Augustus Caesar, they were all leaders of their times. Somebody may be an emperor, somebody may be an artist, somebody may be a musician. But in every birth, he has led the human effort, be it the effort to find light or freedom. So that's what that comes to my mind when I read this line, one in the front of immemorial quest of mankind, like Sri Aurobindo, Ashwapati too has been the eternal leader. And of course, again he repeats, protagonist of the mysterious play. And what is that mysterious play? In which the unknown pursues himself through forms and limits his eternity by the hours. You see, it's all extremely beautifully. Look at these lines. In which the unknown, the U capital, you see, the unknown pursues himself through forms. That means that the supreme divine, what we call the Tat, the unknown divine. But he is pursuing himself. Pursuing himself means he is in the manifestation. And what is manifestation? But nothing but forms. So the supreme divine seeing himself in these myriad forms. You know, I always give the example of those forts in India. You know, in northern India, there are some forts in which there is a Sheesh Mahal. Sheesh Mahal means is a palace of mirrors. Palace of mirror. It is not the palace of mirrors of Louis XIV. I've seen his hall, and that was, of course, a huge hall with mirrors all around. But these kings have had a chamber like that, and there were hundreds of tiny mirrors all over. And then there used to be a dancer in the hall, and when the dancer danced, she would be seen everywhere. And the whole of the person, in every mirror we see the whole person. So that's the image I get when I see this, that in which the unknown pursues himself through form. There's only one person, one divine, but he sees himself in these myriad forms. So too our protagonist, Ashwapati, he is the protagonist, he is the leader. He is everywhere pursuing himself through the forms and limits his eternity by the hours. What does the eternal do? What is the meaning of manifestation? Is delimiting. The word equivalent for manifestation is self-limitation. So, in every way he is delimiting or self-limiting himself. The eternal becomes time, the infinite becomes space, the measured space. So he says, limits his eternity by the hours, and the blind void struggles to live and see. You see, the blind void, the V capital, is the inconscient void. So you see, there's already the process of involution, where the Supreme One Divine has broken himself into hours, into spaces, into forms, and then the inconscient, the blind void, struggles to live and see. You see, there is an element of struggle of evolution, and wanting to what? To live and see. You see, this inconscient, this whole of evolution is a struggle of the inconscient. The word live is very simple, and yet see the significance of the word live. You see, at what level does life come in? From the inconscient to matter to life. And then not only living like the animals and the birds and the trees, but the joie de vivre, the joy of existence, the delight of existence, which is constantly evolving, improving, increasing. So the single word life or live, not life, struggles to live, is not just struggles to survive. To live is to the delight of existence. So that inconscient at every moment, at every level of evolution, it wants to live more and more, express itself more and more, and have the delight of existence more and more. So that's the struggle for life. And seeing of course to become more conscious. A thinker and toiler in the ideal's air. Who? Ashwapati. A thinker and toiler in the ideal's air, you see, is very interesting. I mean, that's why we cannot read Savitri through like that. You see, every word arrests you, stops you and says, hey, look at me once again. Why is Shwabali saying ideal's air? You see, and he's still a thinker and a toiler in the arrest air. Air is of course something ethereal, it's not concrete like matter, it's not concrete like life. Air is thin, it is formless, and air represents the mind. So we have here a thinker and a toiler in the ideals, the highest and the best ideal that mankind has. Again, this Ashwapati is the leader. Because we must remember that all evolution or all progress, not evolution, is spearheaded by an ideal. Think of our own Auroville. It's the ideal first that was given, the Auroville Charter. The ideal is given, and then which human beings try to live up to for generations together, hundreds of years, to manifest that one ideal on the life plane. So first of all, what is important is to give the ideal. And that is what we are getting here, that Ashwapati was a thinker, a toiler, a protagonist, even on the ideals level. brought down to earth's dumb need her radiant power. You see, this whole sentence here is only one sentence. This single sentence tells us only about this first line, her mortal birth. What is it? Compelled her mortal birth. So Sri Aurobindo immediately takes up these 5-7 lines to tell us, brought down to earth. Who brought down? One who is the protagonist, one who is in the front of immemorial quest, one who is a thinker and a toiler. That one, that Ashwapati, that representative, he brought down. So you see what a beautiful way of saying. He brought down, such a person brought down to earth's dumb need. I remember the word Sunday in one of the passages. I forget the line. If anybody remembers that, the famous passage, something where her feet. It's in my office. Do you remember that line, Shruti? All nature dumbly calls to her alone. That's the right word. You see the words dumbly. Same thing, you see, earth's dumb need. So dumb is not this negativeness of the dumbness. Dumb is inarticulate. You see, nature, earth, it doesn't have any voice, it doesn't have any language. But there is an aspiration, there is a need, dumbly calls to her alone. So that is the dumbness you see here. Brought down to earth's dumb need, her radiant power. Her is Savitri's. So it is this Ashwapati who has brought to earth's dumb. Again the word earth and the world, you see. So he is always acting on that cosmic level. The earth's need he is fulfilling. His was a spirit that stooped from larger spheres into our province of ephemeral sight. And supremely beautiful. His was a spirit that stooped from larger spheres. See here, I cannot do better than to read this favorite poem of all of us, A God's Labor. A God's Labor from volume 5, page 99. Now this is what I am trying to give us here when Sri Aurobindo is saying that a spirit that stooped from larger spheres into our province. What's a province? It's not a country, it's not a continent. A little space, a little, it's like what we say, a city. It's smaller than a city even, it's more a locality. So Sri Aurobindo is telling us into our province of ephemeral sight. This is so that supremely beautiful colonist, that spirit, he has limited itself into our ephemeral sight so that we may be able to see him, touch him, speak to him. So the spirit has limited itself, concretized itself in such a way that we can see and touch. Otherwise, he is invisible. So that is the spirit which we see again in Sri Aurobindo's A God's Labor. Well, I'm sure all of you have read it. Have you all read it? Yeah. Not only have I read it, I didn't do it myself, but I choreographed a dance on that, because this lends to great dance. So, when I was in Hyderabad, because there's such a beauty of rhythm and rhyme and imagery. I have gathered my dreams in a silver air between the gold and the blue, and wrapped them softly and left them there, my jeweled dreams of you. And this is the line that I want to quote against this. His was a spirit that stooped from larger spheres. I'd hoped to build a rainbow bridge, marrying the soil to the sky, and so in this dancing planet midge, the moods of infinity. I mean, I think you can stand arrested at this word, the moods of infinity. I mean, here is what I call the poetic sensibility. You may say, Anand, what is there, a mood of infinity? I'm in a bad mood, I'm in a good mood. The moment you sort of mentalize it, it's gone. So in poetry, some things are better unspelled, unspoken. That's why a poet is greater, because there's so much said in what is not said. So he says, and so in this dancing planet midst, the moods of infinity. But too bright were our heavens, too far away, too frail their ethereal stuff, too splendid and sudden our light could not stay, the roots were not deep enough. Now this is a famous paragraph, stanza that all of you know. He who would bring the heavens here must descend himself into clay, and the burden of earthly nature bear, and tread the dolorous way. And tread the dolorous way. Coercing my Godhead, I have come down. You see, this is the line. The Spirit stooped from larger spheres. Coercing my Godhead, I have come down here on the sordid earth. Ignorant, laboring, human grown twixt the gates of death and birth. Well, rest is of course his journey and his struggle. And I think, as I was telling, Savitri is a spiritual autobiography. If you don't have the time to read 24,000 lines, at least read these 24 stanzas. This is again, instead of writing, I would change the title. Instead of God's labor, I would say Sri Aurobindo's labor. It's as good as that. It's absolutely personal struggle and work. I mean, this whole poem is his signature, his work. So rest, when the occasion comes, we'll discuss, but I wanted to tell you this only, that coercing my Godhead, I have come down here on the sordid earth, ignorant, laboring, human grown, twixt the gates of death and birth. Well, rest is long. Maybe I have one or two stanzas here at the end. He who I am was with me still. All veils are breaking now. I've heard his voice and borne his will on my vast, untroubled brow. Well, I don't want to get into that further. It's carrying me further away. Now this is the thing. So his is again the same Ashwapati, the same Sri Aurobindo, who has stooped from larger spheres into our province of ephemeral sight, a colonist from immortality. I don't know what you understand by this word colonist. I mean, it is, but for Indians it has colonizing as a very negative meaning. But how can we say Ashwapati is a colonist from immortality? Colonizing, a colonist. How do we understand that, you see? Because I want to really understand this and see how you understand, because fortunately, I would rather say unfortunately, this word colonist has been used for many other people. And I want to correct, not them, but have a correct understanding, that we cannot use this word or this phrase colonist from immortality to every human being. Because once we want to praise somebody, we say he is a colonist from immortality. But look at this meaning. You see, the word colonist, is really telling us that somebody has colonized the earth. That means somebody from beyond, like the British has colonized India. They came, conquered, and then in the process, they wanted to transfer their culture, their religion, themselves. It's a kind of, they wanted to transfer their culture to India. So colonization has essentially that meaning of really transferring one culture to another. And of course, the true Indian patriot may not like it, but Sri Aurobindo has his own way of unique interpretation. He says this colonizing of India was necessary, was absolutely necessary. Because that is where he explains that this world transfers one culture to the another. Because India was in those days in a great slumber. It had gotten into what in Europe we call the Dark Ages. So we had too much of religionism, too much of superstition, and we had quite forgotten the meaning of the earth. We are all looking toward that liberation, mukti, salvation, and all this religiosity had sunk into some kind of a darkness. So he says nature had to shake India up and say, hey, wake up. There's another thing to be done. So Sri Aurobindo says sometimes nature uses such violent means and methods. Otherwise, if you want to understand rationally and logically, a small country like Britain cannot be conquering a country like India, which is maybe 100 times larger than the country of England. But nature used Britain, brought it to India and to many other places in the East to shake these Asiatic countries from a great slumber. So this is what is the meaning of colonizing, that there is a necessity of transferring the other culture into this one. Now look at this line. If Ashwapati is a colonist from where? From immortality. That means that immortality or his own immortality he wants to transfer to earth. So who is that person who is wanting to do that? Look at him. The one who took up the challenge of making the physical immortality. It was not the Vedic rishis, it was Sri Aurobindo himself. So what more proof you want that it is none but Sri Aurobindo who alone is the colonist from immortality and not XYZ? Because I'm telling you this because I've heard in the ashram many people being referred to, oh, he is a colonist from immortality. So, and then when I think of this, I remembered an explanation by the mother, not of this sentence, but in this context I would like to tell you something more. It was, this is from Mother's Works, volume 9, page 171, on 14th of August 1957. This evening, instead of answering questions, I would like us to meditate on the remembrance of Sri Aurobindo, on the way to keep it alive in us, and on the gratitude we owe him for all that he has done and is still doing in his ever luminous, living and active consciousness, for this great realization which he came not only to announce to the earth but also to realize, and which he continues to realize. Tomorrow is the anniversary of his birth, an eternal birth in the history of the universe. And subsequently, a couple of days later, somebody obviously asked the mother, this was on 14th of August, and on 4th of September 1957, mother now brings out the meaning of Sri Aurobindo's birth. And speaking of that, on 29th of March, which was the 100th anniversary of the mother's coming to Pondicherry, not the date but the year beginning. She came in 1914. But we at Sakar did a program to celebrate the first day of the year of her coming. So we may be thinking, why do we celebrate all this? Some people may ask the question, her birthdays, this centenary and all that. Here is my answer, not my answer, the answer that I found in the mother. Today I received a question about a phrase I used on the 14th of August, the eve of Sri Aurobindo's birthday. And this question seemed interesting to me because it was about one of those rather cryptic phrases that are almost ambiguous through simplification, and which was intended to be like that, so that each one might understand it according to his own plane of consciousness. I think this, we must be very clear about this. Each one might understand it according to his own plane of consciousness. And that is the beauty of Savitri, of all of Sri Aurobindo's works. You see, some of us may read Savitri and prayers and saying, okay, what big about it? Fine, prayers and meditation, we all have our prayers. But then, as we grow higher or deeper in our consciousness, we will see a completely different meaning that unravels itself. And that is the beauty of poetry actually. That is the greatness of poetry. It leaves itself for interpretation on deeper levels according to each one's level of consciousness at that time, at that moment. So, she says, I have already spoken to you several times of this possibility of understanding the same words on different planes. And these words were intentionally expressed with a simplification, a deliberate vagueness, precisely so that they would serve as a vehicle for the complexity of meaning they had to express. This meaning is a little different on the different planes, but it is complementary. And it is only really complete when one is able to understand it on all the planes at once. True understanding is a simultaneous understanding in which all the meanings are perceived, grasped, understood at the same time. But to express them, as we have a very poor language at our disposal, we are obliged to say them one after another, with many words and many explanations. That's what I am going to do now. The question is about the phrase in which I spoke of the birth of Sri Aurobindo. It was on the eve of his birthday, and I called it an eternal birth. That's what I am referring to, a colonist from immortality. I am asked what I meant by eternal. Of course, if the words are taken literally, an eternal birth doesn't signify much. But I am going to explain to you how there can be, and in fact is, a physical explanation or understanding a mental understanding, a psychic understanding, and a spiritual understanding. Physically, now coming directly to the birthday of Mother and Sri Aurobindo, physically, it means that the consequences of this birth will last as long as the earth. So, like we celebrate Christ's birthday, or Sri Krishna's birthday, or Sri Ram's birthday, mankind will be celebrating 15th of August as long as the earth lasts in a civilization. The consequences of Sri Aurobindo's birth will be felt throughout the entire existence of the earth. I hope you catch the meaning of the existence of the earth, not you and me, not human civilization. A civilization beyond also will remember Sri Aurobindo. Because I am zapped by this word, entire existence of the earth. And so I called it eternal, a little poetically. That's on the physical level. Mentally, is a birth, the memory of which will last eternally. Through the ages, Sri Aurobindo's birth will be remembered with all the consequences it has had. What are the consequences? Why did Sri Aurobindo come down? What did he do? In fact, we will see in the next few lines of this Savitri. The consequences are obviously the birth of the supramental. So when even the supermind comes, Sri Aurobindo will be remembered even by the supramental race, because the harbinger of the supramental race was none other than Sri Aurobindo. So even they too will not forget Sri Aurobindo. He says, through the ages, Sri Aurobindo's birth will be remembered with all the consequences it has had. Third, psychically, is a birth which will recur eternally from age to age in the history of the universe. This birth is a manifestation which takes place periodically from age to age in the history of the earth. That is, the birth itself is renewed, repeated, reproduced, bringing every time perhaps something more complete and more perfect. But it is the same movement of the descent, of manifestation, of birth in an earthly body. I'm sure you have understood it. It is the avatar. And this is so clear for those of you who have the Gita in your back of your mind. You see, the birth is a manifestation which takes place periodically from age to age, from yuga to yuga, from yuga to yuga. So in every age, the eternal comes down. And in the history of the earth, the birth itself is renewed, repeated, reproduced, bringing every time perhaps something more. It happened with Sri Ram, with Sri Krishna, with the Buddha, with Christ. But every time the avatar brings something more. One step. You remember 1978, 15th of August. One more step towards eternity. I was really waiting for that great message. I said, what will the Mother tell us on 15th of August? She just put it in simple words, one more step towards eternity. I think it was the most magnificent message I ever heard of. She captures the essence of Sri Aurobindo's birth, the eternal birth. So let's not say Sri Aurobindo is this and that. He is an eternal birth, because this birth of Sri Aurobindo is one more step towards that great eternal march of mankind, of the earth kind. So she says, it will be repeated, but each time something more will be done, something more complete, more perfect. But it is the movement of the descent, of manifestation, of birth in an earthly body. And I'm sure some of you remember, if you have read it anywhere, the Mother also indicates very clearly that Sri Aurobindo's has been the last human, has been the human body. I mean the avatar in the human body. What is it? Avatar in the physical. So you see, again when Mother is telling of birth in an earthly body, so he has been among the chain of avatars, the last avatar in the physical. So tomorrow, when the new race comes, there will be again an avatar, but not in the physical. There could be some other way. That's why Sri Aurobindo says, I'll come back in a new way, take in a new manner, in a new birth. So he will not be born in the human manner. So we can already see that he will return, but not in the human way, and he will not have the body. So he says, and finally, from the purely spiritual point of view, it could be said that it is the birth of the eternal on earth. Simple, straightforward. E capital, birth of the eternal, the manifestation, the avatar. For each time the avatar takes a physical form, is the birth of the eternal himself on earth. So that yuge birth, from age to age, when Sri Krishna says, I come back, the same I. You may call him Christ, you may call him Buddha, you may call him Rama, you may call him Krishna, you may call him Sri Aurobindo. It's the same chain of birth. All that contained in two words, eternal birth. You see, she has given thanks to somebody, whoever has asked the question. So she says, I left that phrase eternal birth, and you see the physical, the mental, the psychic and the spiritual. So why do we celebrate these birthdays, the celebration of their coming? It's not a very personal, it's nothing religious about it. People may think, oh, what is this? Religiosity. So there's nothing religious in this. It's the eternal birth of a consciousness which is taking mankind forward. It's a psychic birth which is within each one of us. It's a mentally we'll remember that. And then, what is that prayer on the Samadhi? Does anyone remember? Our gratitude to this envelope. So we have to express, and when the Mother herself has put on the Samadhi, that our eternal gratitude to thou, to you body who has enveloped this consciousness. So if she can, pardon? So this sense of gratitude, don't we have for Mother and Sri Aurobindo? Who in their bodies have come down to give us this beautiful earth, this beautiful place, this beautiful hope, this beautiful future. So I would say to celebrate their coming, to celebrate their birthdays, is a sense of gratitude. I mean, and then she says, you have suffered so much, you have done so much for us. And regarding suffering, you will see in all his poems. So we would be the most ungrateful creatures, enjoying a place like Auroville and not to celebrate their birthdays, their centenary days. I'm explaining this because I am for this. There are people who are against this, who say, oh, all this religion. Well, there's no sense of that. To thank the Lord and to say, oh Lord, thank you for what you are doing for me. There's no religion in that. So everyone celebrates the way you want to, but there is something called the collective celebration. And I suppose we at Auroville or Aurobindonians anywhere ought to do that. So to conclude, I advise you in future, before telling yourself, why, what does this mean? I don't understand it at all. Perhaps it's not expressed properly. You could say to yourself, perhaps I'm not on the plane where I would be able to understand, and try to find behind the words something more than mere words. There. I think this will be a good subject for our meditation. You see, the other day when we were having a celebration at Sakar and celebrating Mother's centenary year, There was a message at the end which we had given, where she describes the condition of the world, the present world, full of conflict and suffering and sorrow, and disharmony. And then she says, there's only one way out. I mean, you should listen to her voice. You are there. I mean, I never heard the mother so poignantly. When she says, there's only one way out, there's only one way to have a complete, total surrender to the Lord. She says, there's no other way. You may try everything else, everything will fail. A total surrender to the Lord. And then what really touched me deeply was, she says, if you are suffering, if you have any problems, if you have any difficulties, don't blame the circumstances, don't blame the Lord. The only thing you ought to tell yourself is, my surrender is imperfect. My surrender is imperfect. So now, suddenly it shocked me and said, my God, I mean, surrendering is so closely connected with our own progress, our own problems. So we don't blame anybody, we just say, Mother says, tell yourself, my surrender is incomplete or imperfect, whatever. So for the first time I saw a tremendous, absolute, concrete connection between surrender and life and circumstances and difficulties and the world. You don't have to blame America or India or Pakistan or Sri Lanka. I mean, okay, some people do it, let them do it, it's not out. But at least we must be able to say, my God, this world is in this because we have not taken to the Lord. And the Lord may be whatever name you want to, that's irrespective. But it was really an eye-opener, and then it humbles you to say it when you hear that. And the picture of the mother also is so beautiful. She's sitting like that as if talking to you. I wish we had done that program for you at Auroville also one day. Well, we are doing that in August. Let's see what we can do here. But it's magnificent. Well, talking about Sri Aurobindo, I lose sense of time, sense of proportion. So coming back here, so for me that's why I've elaborated this sentence, this phrase, a colonist from immortality, because I'm deeply pained when people use it loosely for human beings. Everybody is not a colonist. It's only one who has brought immortality from that supreme, eternal consciousness and transferring that to earth. And now look at this. A pointing beam on earth's uncertain roads, his birth held up a symbol and a sign. His human self, like a translucent cloak, covered the all-wise who leads the unseeing world. You see, a pointing beam on earth's uncertain roads. Somewhere, again he would see this later, a cone of aspiration. I mean, these are like this cone of fire, cone of flame. And that is Ashwapati, and that is Sri Aurobindo. He said, that is that beautiful pointing beam on earth's uncertain roads. His birth held up a symbol and a sign. Whose birth? Ashwapati's birth held up a symbol and a sign of what is to come. And is a symbol of what has happened in earth's history, spiritual history. I mean, there's so much of compactness in each word. I mean, we can go on talking hours together every word. You see, he is the symbol. Symbol of what? Symbol of this earth's evolution. And so Sri Aurobindo experiences within himself all the truths that mankind has experienced on the spiritual level. be it the Supreme Satchidananda, be it the Godhead in the stone, be it the inner being, be it the universal being, be it Narayana, the Vasudeva. And people sometimes wonder, why does Sri Aurobindo have to go through so many spiritual experiences? Because when we have even a psychic touch, we are glorified and we say, wow, that's enough, and at the end. But Sri Aurobindo had to be a symbol of mankind's aspiration and achievement spiritually, so that he could be that world's desire to bring down the supermind. How can Sri Aurobindo say, I want a supermind, if he could not carry within him this whole burden of spiritual achievement? So he says, his birth held up a symbol and a sign. He is a sign of what is to come. So his birth is all that. And then his human self, like a translucent cloak, covered the all-wise. What is this translucent cloak? What is the translucency? Any idea? Translucent cloak, what does it mean? You know, you have seen a table lamp. A table lamp, it has a round cover. That is a translucent cover. It lets the light out, but you don't see the bulb. You see only the radiating light. So here, his human self, like a translucent cloak, covered the all-wise. The all-wise, the supreme divine divinity, the soul within, is a cover. His body itself is a in fact, in Sri Aurobindo, I don't know if it is in Savitri or somewhere, he calls the supramental body a body of beauty and bliss. A body of beauty and bliss which radiates the supreme light. I mean, the very physical radiates that light. And it's a body of bliss and beauty and bliss. So here, this Ashwapati is his human life, self, like a translucent cloak, covers the all-wise who leads the unseeing world. Why should this cloak, this body cover? Because the mother herself said, had she not covered herself, we wouldn't have been able to bear her luminosity. So all these avatars have to purposely cover themselves with a cloak or a heaviness. Otherwise, that sunlight, when I speak of sunlight, all of you have heard of Sri Ramana. We have his Ramanashram very close to Pondicherry, Tiruvannamalai. He said when he realized the Brahman, even Shankaracharya said the same thing. He said when they had this realization of Brahman, they say it was like a simultaneously 10,000 suns, the light of the 10,000 suns. I mean, you can't even imagine one sun you cannot see, and then, so that is the Brahman. He says we had that experience of a 10,000 suns. So if that is the 10,000 suns, it has to be covered. So it has to be tempered. So that you and me, we can see. Otherwise we'll be blind. Even to see the single sun we get blind. So what about this inner beauty? So that is the body of Sri Aurobindo and the mother. So mother said we have had to temper it down, to cover it, to cloak it, so that you are able to see visibly. Otherwise, look at the sun, you cannot. Affiliated to cosmic space and time, and paying here God's debt to earth and man, a greater sonship was his divine right. Affiliated to cosmic space and time, and paying here God's debt to earth and man. I think those of you who are following classes in Savitri Bhavan must have come across explanation of this, because this is one of the most curious sentences. God's debt to man, God's debt to earth and man. How can God have a debt which he says he is paying here God's debt to earth and man? We are indebted to God. But why should God be indebted to man? So that has been a great puzzle I could not solve. But this is, and paying here God's debt to earth and man, a greatest sonship was his divine right. What could it be? Have you any guess? What could be this God's debt to earth and man? What could be God's debt to earth? I mean, why should he be indebted?
No, there's no earth is mission, and he made us live on earth.
That's right. He takes?
He decided we should live on earth.
To take birth on earth? Or to create these people on earth?
Yeah.
No, he put us into this mess.
He put earth into mess. So why should he be indebted to earth?
Well, he put it into us there.
No, he actually said it was our
I didn't want to. He put us here.
He put you here? Or you put yourself here? You will see one day you chose to be here at this time, at this place, and in Auroville. You chose, somebody in you chose. It's not God, it's your own soul. So that's really interesting. And paying here God's debt to earth and man, I leave it to you. Because, pardon? He wanted to become the many. But the word is, what I'm not understanding is the debt word, debt, I'm indebted to you because you have done something for me, I'm indebted to you. So why is God telling that I'm indebted to you? Or I'm indebted to man and earth? What have we done for God? That God is saying, I'm indebted to you. Debt is, somebody has given you something, you are indebted. You are in debt because you have borrowed 10,000 rupees, so he says, I'm in debt, so I have to return that money to you. So what is that? Go ahead. Yeah?
Is it because gods cannot evolve and man and earth can evolve?
Well, that's a completely different concept. Well, maybe teen is closer to something like that. Yeah, you see, well, yes, I told you on this day you should keep some free time. Do you have any program, Mala, after this? Yeah. Now just let's see. You see, this debt is there, partly you are right and partly Tine. You see, mankind has borne a lot of suffering. Well, it is not from the philosophical point of view that he has put us into suffering. It is from the evolutionary point of view, it is not like that. But yes, he says, you have been suffering for whatever the evolutionary cause. I mean, because of this level of the evolution of mind, etc. So now he says, okay, because you have been suffering on this evolutionary level, I come down to you and take away your suffering, or at least, support you when you in your suffering. So he feels that, look, it's not that I am putting you into trouble, but because of this evolutionary stage which he cannot help, because in the evolution this mental level, the ego level, the body level, the suffering was part of this game. So he says, the best I can do is to come down myself and help you to bear with this suffering. So that way he is indebted, saying, mankind, of course, beyond this, there is no suffering. So God's indebtedness will not be there. But he says, look, in this evolutionary principle that I have made originally, but who are the sufferers? You people are suffering. But the best I can do for you is I'll come down myself in the physical and share your burden of suffering and sort of lighten your burden, lighten your suffering. So he says to earth and man, I'll come down, and then he comes down and really suffers. There's no avatar who has not suffered. You know very well the Jesus Christ on the cross. In fact, Savitri will tell us later, every avatar has been on the cross. Not literally the cross like that, but everywhere it's the same treatment we are given to God. He would say here, he would say the same thing. He says, my gaping wounds are 1,001, and the Titan kings assail, but I cannot rest till my task is done and wrought the eternal will. And now you see the suffering of every avatar. How they mock, they is the humankind. How they mock and sneer both devils and men. What? Thy hope is chimera's head, painting the sky with its fiery stain. Thou shalt fall, and thy work lie dead. Who art thou that babblest of heavenly ease, and joy and golden room? To us, who are waves on inconscient seas, and bound to life's iron doom. This earth is ours, a field of night for our petty flickering fires. How shall it brook the sacred light, or suffer a God's desires? Come, let us slay him and end his course. Then shall our hearts have release from the burden and call of his glory and force, and the curb of his wide, white peace. I mean, even the devils can utter something very beautiful. The curb of his wide, white peace. That's what the avatar brings. He says, let us curb that, let us shorten that, let's get rid of him. But they know the essential truth of the avatar, the wide, white peace. But then Sri Aurobindo writes, but the God is there in my mortal breast, who wrestles with error and fate, and tramples a road through mire and waste for the nameless immaculate. A voice cried, this is a la Sri Aurobindo, typically. He says, a voice cried, go where none have gone. Dig deeper, deeper yet, till thou reach the grim foundation stone, and knock at the keyless gate. That's the inconscient, where Mother Sri Aurobindo went. I saw that a falsehood was planted deep at the very root of things, where the grey sphinx guards God's riddle sleep on the dragon's outspread wings. I left the surface gods of mind and life's unsatisfied seas, and plunged to the body's alleys blind to the nether mysteries. And so it goes on, then every man. But then you see, the beauty is what this avatar does. After going through all the suffering, all the pain, the beauty is, on a desperate stair my feet have trod, armored with boundless peace, bringing the fires of the splendor of God into the human abyss. He who I am was with me still. All veils are breaking now. I've heard his voice and borne his will on my vast untroubled brow. The gulf twixt the depths and the heights is bridged, and the golden waters pour down the sapphire mountain rainbow ridge and glimmer from shore to shore. You can already see the forthcoming of the supermind. Heaven's fire is lit in the breast of the earth, and the undying suns here burn. Through a wonder cleft in the bounds of birth, the incarnate spirits yearn. Like flame to the kingdoms of truth and bliss, down a gold-red stairway wend the radiant children of paradise, clarioning darkness's end, the new race. I mean, marvelous. What a simple, the radiant children of paradise, clarioning darkness's end. She says, I have already seen that. Like flame to the kingdoms of truth and bliss, down a gold-red stairway went the radiant children of paradise, clad in darkness's end. That's why I call this absolute his own autobiographical poem. A little more and the new light's doors shall be carved in silver light, with its aureate roof and mosaic floors, in a great world bare and bright. I shall leave my dreams in their argent air, for in a raiment of gold and blue, there shall move on the earth, embodied and fair, the living truth of you. Later on the mother explains, yes, the living truth of you, he indicated about her. So this is that magnificent avatar who goes to the cross, but this avatar says, I will not give up, I will not give in, because I have seen the radiant children coming down. The new race is there. And that's what Ashwapati does when he calls the mother, and then the Supreme Mother says, "O forerunner, I've heard thy cry." Well, Stella Poesy, I think, we speak about it and there's no end to it. Well, as I told you, there's no time limit, I suppose. You keep coming, 4 people, 5 people, but Savitri is a passion for me, and when you open it, it completely captures you. Well, yeah, I think let's have concentration.